G'day guys, Dean from Blog for the Blood God here, and today we're doing an Abaddon the Despoiler masterclass. I'm going to go through his strengths, his weaknesses, how to get the most out of those strengths, how to mitigate those weaknesses, and I'm also going to touch on what to do if you go up against Abaddon the Despoiler, and what you can do to try to minimize his strengths and expose his weaknesses. So with that being said, let's get into the episode.
Blog for the Blood God.
G'day guys, so today we're talking about Abaddon the Despoiler, the big man himself, the boss of all Chaos Legions, as he would have it, and we're going to be talking about how to utilize him best and most effectively on the tabletop. So it's going to be a bit of a deep dive. I'm not going to go through all of his profile and all that sort of shit, because we've seen that 1,000 times before. The book's been out for long enough now that you should know what this man does. And he's been a bit of a buzz all over the internet, so there should be no real surprises there. What I do want to talk about is how to actually wield him in games more effectively. So I want to talk about which legions he fits in with best. I want to talk about what his strengths are and how to capitalize on them. I want to talk about what his weaknesses are and how to sort of avoid them or mitigate them. And then I also want to talk about it from the opponent's perspective, and if you're going up against Abaddon, how to minimize his strengths and how to expose his weaknesses. So it's going to be a bit of a deep dive that should be appeal to pretty much everybody, because Abaddon's going to be everywhere, so you're going to want to know these things. So basically, let's start off with his strengths. So why is it that Abaddon is so goddamn good? And primarily this is because he's got the phase locked, so you can only do 3 wounds to him per phase. And then that combos with the fact that he's a character with 9 wounds, which means that he's protected by the lookout serval. And basically this just means that he's insanely fucking hard to kill. And then even if you do manage to break through and attack him, he's got a 2-up save, he's got Armor of Contempt, he's got, a Mark of Nurgle with Toughness 6, like he's got a lot of things going for him defensively. He's got the Mark of Tzeentch, so he ignores the first failed save. He's just an absolute fucker to kill. But being an absolute fucker to kill isn't really that good on its own. You need to pair that with something that makes it worth taking. And this is where Abaddon truly shines, in the way that he's an absolute monster in melee. And he also provides a few different aura buffs. So these are what make him worth taking, because not only is he very fucking hard to kill, but when he does make it into those combats, he kills the fuck out of things. And meanwhile, he's providing buffs to the rest of your army while it's advancing up the table. So those two things combo together to make him really, really powerful. So I guess the next thing is talking about which legion should take him, and more or less any legion can take him. You can plug him into almost any legion and he will just make that army probably better. Not always though. Some legions might prefer to run without Abaddon. So for example, Creations of Bile, one of the strengths to that legion is that they have a really good secondary objective where every time a Creations of Bile unit kills an enemy unit in melee, you get victory points. So whilst Abaddon is really good on his own, he doesn't really synergize well with that legion, because one of the main reasons that you take that legion is so that you can kill things with that legion. And if Abaddon kills something, he wouldn't generate you victory points towards that. And this is really tricky, because what that allows your opponent to do is suicide units into Abaddon so that you can't kill them with your units. So like if they know that in your turn, you're going to move your possessed up and you're going to kill their, guardsmen, and they know that that's going to happen, they'll just charge their guardsmen into Abaddon, and now Abaddon kills your guardsmen, and therefore you don't get the victory points for killing them, because that Abaddon's not a Creations of Bile unit. So there's a few different ways that they can use Abaddon against you in a Creations of Bile list. And then there's things like Abaddon obviously doesn't receive buffs from the other legions, so he can buff them, because he's one of his buffs is pick a friendly Heretic Astartes unit within range and they get reroll hits. So he can give that to them. But for example, if you want to cast psychic powers on him or use other buffs on him, you can't. So the only way that you can do that is to run him in a pure Black Legion list. So this is why I think pure Black Legion lists, they just must take Abaddon because he's just so goddamn good. So here's some of the stuff that you get in a pure Black Legion list. The first, like I just mentioned, was that you can cast psychic powers and buffs and things like that on him, which is really good for things like Pact of Flesh, so that allows you to heal him, which is really fucking annoying on somebody as tough as Abaddon. But it also allows you to put things like Diabolical Strength on him, which is insane, insane boost to his offensive output. You know, you can put, there's tons of different buffs on him, right? The other thing is that it also allows you to gain pretty easy access to advance and charge on Abaddon, which is really good. You can do that via either spending the command point to make him count as Red Corsairs, or there's a Dark Apostle prayer. If your Dark Apostle's Marcus Slanesh, he gets a prayer that allows him to prick a friendly Legion Marcus Slanesh unit within range. So that means that if he's Black Legion, he's the same Legion as Abaddon, therefore he can give Abaddon advance and charge through that. So there's a few different ways that you can do that, and that makes Abaddon really, really good. And then also just the command ability that Abaddon has, where he picks a unit and gives it reroll hits. If it's a Black Legion unit, it also gains reroll wounds, which just makes things absolutely fucking murderous. So Abaddon in a Black Legion list is just insane. So we're going to talk about all of his strengths and weaknesses now, and ways that you can work around them. So we've touched on his strengths, being that he's hyper durable and hyper killy, right? One of his biggest weaknesses, however, is that he's quite slow. So he's only got a 6-inch move, and he has limited access to things like advance and charge. Most legions aren't going to be able to advance and charge with him. And because of that, what's going to happen often is you're going to deploy him on the table somewhere, and your opponent is going to know where he is, which means they're going to know your vector of attack. So by that I mean they're going to know exactly where you can go, and they're going to be able to figure out where you're likely to go because they're going to know what Abaddon's hunting, and therefore they're going to be able to play around that. And the other thing is he doesn't have fly, so that makes it difficult for him to get past enemy units. So if your opponent's worried that Abaddon's going to charge, you know, it's their vehicles, they can just throw a unit of infantry out in front, and now Abaddon can't get past the infantry to hit the vehicles. So he's relatively easy to block with movement, and he's really slow. And basically what this means is that your opponent is almost going to be able to dictate what Abaddon gets into combat with, which is really, really bad. They don't want to be doing, like, you don't want them to be doing that. So that's one of his biggest weaknesses, and that's why when people are raving about how, he kills this, he kills that, he's so powerful, it's like, yeah, but he's not likely to make it into combat with the things that you want to make it into combat with. He's most likely to just make it into combat with things that your opponent wants you in combat with. So that's his weaknesses. Now, the best way to mitigate this weakness and therefore gain access to one of his strengths, which is his damage output, is to either run him as Black Legion so that you can get easy access to the advance and charge, or you want to send him straight up the center of the table, because if you do this, you're maximizing your potential for your charge vectors, right? Because if you're going straight up the center, you can go left later in the game, you can go right later in the game, you can go back later in the game, you can sort of pick which direction you want to take him, and that way you're going to get value out of him. Whereas if you just like run him up one flank, your opponent is just going to head everything that's scared of Abaddon is going to head down the other flank, and Abaddon's never going to make it into that combat, because even if he does change directions, he's too slow to change directions, and when he does, they can just throw infantry out in front of him to slow him down. He also doesn't have the ability to like fall back and charge or anything like that. So if your opponent throws like a couple of rhinos into him, for example, he's going to kill one of them, but he's probably not going to kill 2 rhinos in a single fight phase. So if they want to stop you from being able to charge something, they can throw 2 rhinos into you, which are insignificant units that they don't really need anymore. And then they can use that as a way of going, okay, cool, now in your turn, you're going to kill the other Rhino, but you're not going to be able to fall back and then charge their unit of whatever it is that they're protecting. So yeah, running him up the center of the table protects you from those things. And the other thing is keeping units wrapped around him, you know, for as long as you sort of can, so that A, you're protected from any shooting or smite damage, because one of the easiest ways to put him down is, you know, you move up, you put a smite or 2 into him to try to take those first 3 wounds, then you put some bullets into him, take another 3, and then you charge him, you fight first, and you take the final 3, and he's dead. So a lot of armies are going to have the capacity to just kill him in a single fight, in a single turn. So what you need to do is put a unit wrapped around him so that he's protected from those smites and that he's protected from that shooting, which means your opponent now can't kill him. And my advice for people playing against Abaddon would be, basically, if you can't kill him in a single turn, then don't even try to kill him at all. You know, if you're staring down the barrel at him and you're like, I could put some shooting into him and take 3 wounds off, but it's not going to kill him, and then he's on me next turn, then you're probably better off putting that shooting somewhere else, because the damage that you're going to do to something else might actually be relevant. Whereas if you just put 3 wounds on him, like, that means nothing to him. Particularly in a Black Legion list where he can be healed. So yeah, generally speaking, you want to time it so that you know that you're going to kill him in a single turn. This is true also for a battle round. So for example, one way to kill him is let him charge you, and then you do some damage to him in that fight, and then so he's taken 3 in his turn, and then in your turn you can then move, shoot him again, and then charge. So there's a few ways that you can do damage to him across the span of a battle round, because if you do it that way, he doesn't have an opportunity to heal, because that happens in his turn. So you can do that. That's a relatively effective way of dealing with him. But I think the most effective way of dealing with Abaddon is to acknowledge the fact that he's a single model that's going to shred whichever unit he touches, but he's slow and he can't fly. So you can just sort of kite him around the table where you run around and he chases you. And there's not much he can really do about that. So there's a few ways that you can mitigate this as a Chaos player. If you're looking at your opponent and you're like, this guy knows what he's doing, he's going to try and avoid Abaddon, he's going to kite around, he's going to throw move blocking in front of me, and Abaddon's going to spend the whole game just killing shitty units that nobody cares about. If you think that your opponent is going to be doing that sort of thing, what you can do is you can either bring shooting elements in your army to kill those infantry units, right? So if you bring a unit of obliterators are fantastic at clearing out shitty units, because they get 9 plus d6 shots each at strength 5 AP1, so they're really good at just going, cool, you've got a unit of, you know, Necron warriors over there, we're going to delete them, right? I actually just filmed a battle report, which should be out soon, where I had a unit of 3 obliterators just killed a unit of 20 warriors in a single shooting phase. They just went and just killed them. So yeah, really effective at killing screens. So if you use something like that, or a Forge Fiend or Havocs or whatever it is that you have in your list, use them to clear out those screens and let Abaddon deal with the big targets. Let Abaddon go in and bring down the knights, bring down the tanks, bring down the, you know, the monsters, the Tyranid Hive Tyrants and shit. Like, don't shoot them with your obliterators. Even though obliterators are quite effective at killing big targets as well, you're better off using them to kill the things that are going to stop Abaddon from doing what he wants to do. And then your next thing is that you can deep strike him. So let's say you're running a purely combat-based list, right? Like a Creations of Baal list or an Emperor's Children list, or, you know, whatever. Even a Black Legion list where you've pivoted into like predominantly combat. What you can do is you can deep strike him. So, and this is something your opponent's not going to see coming, and they're going to have to rethink their battle plan on the fly. And anytime that you can do something unpredictable, that's always good. Unpredictable is almost always a good thing, because predictable plays, your opponent will have a predictable answer to. If they know, oh, he's got Abaddon, Abaddon's going to run up the center of the table, so here's what I'm going to do to mitigate that. Whereas what you can do if you deep strike him is because he's only got a 60 mil base, I think it is. It's like a dreadnought size base, old school box dreadnought, and that means he actually is pretty hard to screen out, right? He's not like a whole unit of Terminators, he's just a one guy, so he's relatively hard to screen out. And if you have him in deep strike, now your opponent can't predict his vector, they can't predict where he's going to go and what he's going to do. They can't really plan for him, and then they have to dedicate resources to screening out their backfield to stop you from dropping Abaddon in behind them. And then even if you are forced to drop in front of them, well, Abaddon's so slow. Turn 2, if you're deep striking, you're going to be 9 inches away from your opponent. But if you were walking, the chances of you being closer than that is relatively low, right? So realistically, you don't lose anything by deep striking him. All you do is gain the ability to trick your opponent into, you know, not knowing where he's going to come from. The one thing that you do sort of lose is the command phase abilities on him, right? Because, like, for example, his reroll hits and wounds thing, that happens in the command phase. So if he arrives via deep strike, he won't be on the table during the command phase, which means you don't get to use that ability. However, I think it's a good trade-off in those sort of games where you're like, he needs to get up there, he needs to get up there fast, and he needs to get past all of their screens. And it's worth noting that he gives +1 to charge as well. But yeah, so if you deep strike him or use his warp strike ability, then the other good thing about doing that is you can drop him in behind your opponent, and he is so freaking tough and so freaking scary that it actually doesn't matter if he comes from behind, because he doesn't need the protection as much as you might think. And ultimately, if you're able to drop him down behind your opponent, they're going to have to turn around, they're going to have to dedicate resources to going back to deal with Abaddon, and because he's fucking Abaddon, it's going to be significant resources. They're not going to be able to just turn around and go back with, like, just general crap. They're actually going to have to go back with something of substance, of something with value. They're going to have to go back with multiple units, something that can go back there and shoot him, something that can put a smite on him, which means that if they're closer to your front units, they're going to have to head back significantly in order to make it so that he's the closest target for the purposes of smite. So deep striking them in a little pocket in their backfield can be super fucking annoying, because your opponents, first of all, they're not going to be able to put him down easily, which means that you're going to drop in, go for your charge, even if you fail, which you're likely to, but even if you fail, you're then going to be able to go, okay, cool, I failed, now I'm going to survive his turn, and now I'm moving in and then charging again, like, really, really strong. And it also means that, like, you're able to sort of pincer attack your opponent, where if they head backwards, they go and run into Abaddon, but if they head forwards, they're going to run into your Terminators or what have you. So comboing that is quite powerful as well. So that's one of my favorite ways to use Abaddon, is to sort of deep strike him in behind your opponent and just pincer attack them and trick them into splitting their army in half so that you sort of conquer and divide. That's an effective way of using Abaddon, and that gets around the fact that he's slow. It gets around the fact that he doesn't have fly, so people can just throw crappy infantry in front of him and block him. It gets around that he has a predictable vector that your opponent can predict where he's going to strike from. It gets around a lot of the weaknesses of Abaddon. And it allows you to further capitalize on his strengths in that he's innately durable, so you don't necessarily need to protect him with units. And it also gets around his, it also capitalizes on his strength that he's an absolute monster of a beat stick, which means he can go into things and destroy them with minimal support. You know, you don't need to soften up a unit before Abaddon charges it, and you don't need to do any, like, multi-charges or anything like that. You can just send Abaddon in on his own, and he'll fucking smash things. So that's a really effective way of using Abaddon. And so if you see that your opponent has Abaddon in their list, they're going to tell you whether or not they're going to deep strike him, but you need to basically make sure that you have an understanding of how to screen out your backfield. And the best way to do that is to literally borrow the model or just measure the base, right? And then just take that over to your deployment zone. Let's say they let you borrow the model, and you just basically make sure that you put him in a corner and then make sure that your units are within 9 inches of him, so that you know he can't fit in that corner, and then go to the other corner, and then probably go to your midfield somewhere, and just make sure that when you put those units down in your deployment, he can't fit in anywhere in those areas. The other thing worth noting when it comes to screening, and this is a very common mistake that I see people make, is they place their units where they want to be for the screen, right? So like I was just saying, is they go, okay, cool, if I put my unit of, you know, guardsmen here, that means you won't be able to fit in that corner. If I put my other unit of guardsmen there, that means you won't be able to fit in that corner. They lay it all out during deployment. But then what happens is if you go first, you have an opportunity to pop a hole in one of those screens by killing one of those units, and then in your next turn, you can drop in that hole. Whereas what's much smarter to do is put your units, when you're screening, somewhere where in your first turn, they will be able to move to create the screen. So you want to put them like behind a ruin somewhere where they can't be shot. But say you want to be 9 inches from the corner, because if your model's 9 inches from the corner, he can't hop in that corner. So what you want to do is you want to be 15 inches from that corner, but hidden. And that way in the Black Legion turn 1, they can't kill that unit of guardsmen that's prepared to build your screen, and they can't drop in turn 1 either, so they can't do anything. And then in your turn 1, you then move out and create the screen. And that way you've bought yourself an extra turn. So always when you're making your screens, the best way to do it is not to actually establish your screens during deployment, but to establish them in your turn. And this also tricks your opponent to a degree, where if you've got your unit 15 inches from that corner, they're going to think that you've abandoned the idea of screening, right? They're going to think, oh, he's left me a massive gap over there. So in their first turn, they're going to make all of their moves basically around the fact that they're going to assume Abaddon is going to arrive in that corner. And then what you do is you just move your guardsmen out there in your first turn after they've had their first turn, and now he's going to have to rethink his plan on the fly. So pre-measuring your screens and then deploying in somewhere where you can set up a screen instead of just deploying a screen is really powerful. And this is also really fun when you've got like move, or warp time, or some equivalent of warp time, you know, like Eldar with their, whatever theirs is called, you know, those sorts of things are really good because you can then deploy like 21 inches from the corner, which is huge, right? So you could deploy your pretty much whole army on the right-hand side of your deployment, and he's gonna go, oh, sick, I can just come in from the left. So he's gonna move the rest of his army around to the left so that when Abaddon drops, he's with the rest of the army. Or they're going to move the rest of their army around to the right so that when they drop Abaddon in, he's created a pincer, depending on what, you know, their plan is. Either way, they're going to have a plan, and they're going to move their army to suit that plan based on the fact that they think they're going to be able to drop Abaddon in that corner. And then what you do is you just go, okay, cool, he's had his first turn, he's moved his whole army to set up for this play on turn 2. And then you've gone, yep, no worries, I'm going to move my guardsmen, and they're going to move their, 12 inches, which gets them within 9 inches of that corner. So Abaddon now can't drop over in that corner. And your opponent's going to be like, ah, fuck, I was planning for Abaddon to go there, and now I fucking have to go, Abaddon's going to have to go over here, and I've already got units over here. I don't want Abaddon over here. I want Abaddon to be doing something else. So that's a really effective way of using the screens to interrupt your opponent's battle plan. And then if you're screening Abaddon out with a small unit of guardsmen, for example, that's actually really good because when he does drop, he's going to drop, somewhere else near those guardsmen. So say your entire army's deployed to the right, he wants to drop in on the left, you put the guardsmen on the left, he now has to drop in further than 9 inches from those guardsmen, and then he's going to have to try and charge the guardsman, who gives a shit. And if he fails that charge, then you go into your turn, you still have those guardsmen, and those guardsmen can just move in front of Abaddon, staying further than 3 inches away, so we can't heroically intervene into them, and create a wall. And now Abaddon has to spend that turn dealing with those guardsmen as well. He can't fly over them, he can't walk around them. It really fucks Abaddon if you do that. So they're things to look out for, and the best way to look out for them as a Chaos player is to focus on shooting out those screens early, trying to find a way to get those units and kill them. So things like Helldrakes are really good, because they can get those units that are hidden and they can dig them out. Whereas if your opponent's smart and they have a couple of ruins in their deployment and they're able to hide all these small units around, like, your Obliterators are going to struggle to kill those units. Your Havocs are going to struggle to kill those units because you just can't get to them. So being able to use Helldrakes is one way, and the other way is just combat. So for example, if you're running Black Legion, one of the tricks you can use is a big unit of bikes, and they can basically move their 20 inches with their advance, and then you can use 1 CP to make them count as Red Corsairs for that turn, and then they go in and charge, because they can advance and charge with Red Corsairs. So you can use that to sort of dig out those units that are buried real deep, and the bikers are really good at killing small things like guard squads, or a unit of 5 intercessors or something like that, like a unit of Mark of Khorne icon bikes. Really good at killing that sort of stuff. And that's really important. If you're playing with Abaddon and you let your opponent keep those little units, they can use those little units to be an absolute fucking nightmare for you. So I think Abaddon is one of the best models in the game. He's one of the best data sheets. He's really fucking good, but you need to be smart with him. You can't, he's not an unga bunga, just charge in and just blow things up. Like, you actually need to play with him very intelligently. You can't just run him up the table. He's not like a knight that's just got a ridiculous profile. Like, you just run up the table and he just kills things and it's fine. He has got weaknesses. Primarily his movement is a huge weakness for him. And most top tier players will tell you that movement is the most important phase of the game. You ask anybody and they're like, well, realistically, a game of 40k is all about scoring points. It's not actually about which units kill what. It's about scoring victory points. And one of the best ways to do that is through movement. You need to be moving, you need to be in the right areas at the right times so that you can score those victory points. And Abaddon is awful at that. He's actually awful at that part of the game. He excels in the other parts, but when it comes to scoring, he's really quite bad. One of the other strengths that I forgot to mention was that because of his base size, if you put him in the center of an objective marker, it's actually impossible for your opponent to move onto that objective or within range of that objective to hold it without risking a heroic intervention from Abaddon. So that's actually really effective. So basically what this means is if you want to take an objective that Abaddon's on, you're going to need to send in 2 units. One of them's going to have to charge Abaddon and basically commit suicide, and then the other one is going to hold the objective. That's the only way that you're going to be able to take an objective off of Abaddon. Whereas if you just throw 1 unit of OBSEC models on there and you're like, yep, cool, these guys jump up onto the objective, he's just going to shred them, and then he holds the objective still, and you just lost a unit. So you need to hit him with 2, and only one of them gets in combat with him, because that essentially prevents him from being able to do a heroic intervention. It prevents him from attacking that unit, because you would go in base contact with him, so even with pile-ins and things like that, he's not going to be able to touch the other unit. And that's the only way to mitigate that. So that's like, his strength is that he heroic intervenes on objectives really well, but his weakness is that if you throw multiple units at it, or the way to mitigate that strength is throw multiple units at it, and that way you can take that objective off of Abaddon, and all Abaddon's doing is killing one of those units. So you throw a Rhino into him, and then move the tactical marines that jumped out of the Rhino. They move on to the objective, but the Rhino charges Abaddon. It's like, cool, now Abaddon can't kill those tactical marines. There's 5 of them, their objective secured. So they take that objective off of Abaddon, and all it cost was a Rhino. So that's a few of the strengths and weaknesses. Now, as for Legion-specific stuff, basically none of the Legions can use any of their warp-like traits on him. Another thing worth noting is that if you take Abaddon in your list, he has to be your Warlord, right? And you can't take the Legion-specific relics if your Warlord is not from that Legion. So for example, if you want to take one of the Emperor's Children relics, you can't take Abaddon in your list to do so, because all of the relics are locked to that legion. So it's really important that when you're writing your lists, you check that, because this is a very common mistake that I see made, and I believe it's a genuine mistake. I don't think anyone's trying to, game the system here. But yeah, basically, if you're not prepared for that, if you don't consider that in your list writing, you could end up with an illegal list. So just note that if you take Abaddon, it does limit your other choices elsewhere. Other legions that I think he synergizes well with, I think he synergizes quite well with the word bearers, because the word bearers he gives reroll hits, which is not great because they already get that, right? So his aura buffs and stuff don't synergize particularly well, but their secondary is all about controlling the center of the table. And generally what's going to happen is you're going to take two secondaries. You're going to take Warp Ritual and whatever the word bearers one's called. And that way, basically, both of those are hold the center of the table and do actions, right? So if both of your secondaries are coming from there, then Abaddon's really good, because then all he has to do is get to the center of the table. He doesn't have to get into their backfield, and it's really hard for them to use infantry to screen him out to stop him from getting into the center of the table. And then while you've got your Psyker doing the Warp Ritual, and you've got your infantry unit with the Icon doing the Word Bearers one, you've got Abaddon running interference, and anything that comes in to try to stop those two units from doing what they want to do has to fucking deal with Abaddon, which means they have to come to you. So that's a really effective synergy with Abaddon. I think he works really well in a Word Bearers list. I think he works quite well in Iron Warriors as well, because the rest of the army is so innately durable that if they decide, oh, we're going to ignore Abaddon and we're going to try and kill everything else, they're going to really struggle to kill everything else. And also, the Iron Warriors don't have a lot of offensive damage output. So because they don't get the reroll hits that Word Bearers get, they don't get the ignoring modifiers that the Emperor's Children get, they don't get the plus attacks that the Black Legion and the World Eaters get. The pluses to hit that the Black Legion get, the pluses attacks the World Eaters get. There's tons of things that they don't gain that would essentially limit their damage output. So having Abaddon in there with his massive damage output is actually a huge buff to the Iron Warriors, and it actually makes them much more scary. So I think the Iron Warriors are a good recipient. Black Legion, obviously. Word Bearers, yes. The ones I wouldn't consider him in are Creations of Bile. I wouldn't consider him in an Alpha Legion list as much, simply because Alpha Legion's main strength is going to be the mission. That's where they excel. They're really good at scoring secondaries. They're really good at controlling the table. They're really good at moving around and doing that. And Abaddon's awful at all of those things. So he doesn't really synergize well in their list. That being said, again, in the same vein as the Iron Warriors, he does bring a source of damage output that the Alpha Legion struggle with. However, I think if you're running Alpha Legion, you're really just pivoting really hard into playing the mission, and you're just going to not try to kill your opponent. You're just going to try to play the mission, and you're going to try to mitigate their damage by doing things like charging them with rhinos and, slowing them down and screening them and, preventing them from shooting you with the conceals and all of that sort of stuff. In which case, doing damage to them is not really your goal. So having Abaddon in the list doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. And then obviously Creations Bile, you don't necessarily want to take him, because then he potentially mitigates your ability to score your secondary objective. But yeah, so I'm going to wrap it up there. I hope you enjoyed this bit of a masterclass on Abaddon the Despoiler. Let me know if you'd like me to go into a little bit more specific detail. I can do some stuff where I can get the model out on the table and show you how to set up these infantry screens against him. I can show you how to do the heroic interventions on the objective, all of those sorts of things. So if you want a bit more detail, or if you want to see a little bit more of the specific combos that you can do with Abaddon, so given that he has all 4 marks of chaos, he actually has some quite interesting, quite spicy combos that can really dial up that durability or that offensive output. These things have been covered elsewhere online, but let me know if you'd like to see me cover them as well. And with that being said, I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Thanks for tuning in. And yeah, I'll see you around. Cheers. Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode on Abaddon the Despoiler. Make sure you let me know in the comments below if you want to see more content like this, and if you want to see me deep dive Abaddon even further with some practical examples of him on the table. So Definitely let me know if that's something you're interested in, and also keep your eyes out because I've got a battle report coming out soon that has Abaddon the Despoiler in it, where I showcase some of the different moves and different techniques you can use to protect him from things like the Nightbringer, who is a very powerful anti-Abaddon destroyer because he can go in and he doesn't care about your phase lock, he doesn't care about your invulnerable save, he just goes in and fucks. So if you want to see a little bit more information about how to wield Abaddon the Despoiler in those sorts of matchups, keep your eye out for the Black Legion versus Necron battle report that should be coming up in the next couple of days. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you guys more in the comments below, so let me know your thoughts, and yeah, let's keep this conversation rolling.
Look for the blood god.
Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the blood god, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the blood god, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not one, not two, but 6 neoprene objective markers, perfectly designed for 9th edition Warhammer 40k. But wait, there's more. For a limited time only, people who sign up on Patreon to support Blog for the Blood God as a Skull Champion tier $5 per month member will gain access to a custom design service where I will design a unique logo to support their gaming club, like the one I did to the left here for the Potato Farmers local gaming club here in Melbourne. Follow the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today.